It's the biggest form of robbery that we've seen in the Western world of the last 20 to 30 years. It's taxation by stealth. If you were a high rate taxpayer, that meant something. And if you were earning 100 grand a year, you were minted. What we would call working class jobs are now higher rate taxpayers, and people are struggling because that 100k a year should have risen with inflation, and it should be 160k a year before you hit that tax bracket.
Damien Jordan is a YouTuber and podcaster helping the world understand personal finance.
James and Damien discuss why tax quietly kills wealth, if crypto's a Ponzi scheme, and
the problem with investing.
If you've got kids, I think it's 2 kids, you lose the credits and the childcare allowance, which means your marginal tax rate shoots up to thousands of %. So actually someone with a couple of kids with 100 grand income is better staying at that point than getting a pay rise, which is mental.
Yeah, I just can't understand that.
Yeah, no one can. The problem is that when these changes get brought in, they affect a very small amount of people. And then over time, more and more people get dragged into them because of the fiscal drag. And then the tax revenue becomes so significant that the politicians just can't get rid of it. One example that I could give to you recently in the UK is this mansion tax. So,
as you'll notice, I don't promote any other people's crap in this podcast, only my own stuff. But if you're out there running a small business and you want to use social media to make money online, it's what I've spent the last 10 years doing. I now teach other people how to do it. If you head to my website, jamessmith.business, you can see what I've got on offer for you. Even this very podcast is a means of me marketing my businesses. This is what I probably have the most expertise in. So one more time, that's jamessmith.business. Head to the website, see how I can help. Back to the episode. So when we talk about investing, people can say that the markets or different places you invest, you could get 7, 8, 9% back. And that sounds great. But then I factor into that, okay, what amount of that is inflation? And then even if you were to say it was a third or a half, I then think, well, I've still got to pay tax on that. So those people saying, oh, put it in an ETF or an index fund, you're going to get 9% back a year. Those numbers aren't quite accurate, or is that a misinterpretation?
No, I think you're spot on. So I think the people who sit there and say the stock market's averaged 10% a year for 100 years are telling kind of like a half truth, and it can be a bit misleading. If you bang that number into a compound interest calculator, which will try and help you estimate what the value might be in the future, it's going to look very flattering. So the gold standard of research on this is Dimpson, Marsh and Staunton. They produce an annual book, almost, it's hundreds of pages, on stock market returns across the globe. And TLDR is, it's around 5% after you strip out inflation for the last 100 years. But that doesn't, we've had a pretty good 100 years. America's been on an absolute tear. So, conservatively, a financial advisor would work out the return at 4%. So what they know then is that the number that it spits out at the end is inflation protected. You'll probably have more money than that when you get to retirement, but it's not increases in purchasing power. It's like your Mars bar getting smaller kind of effect, if you want like a visual representation of inflation. So I would say work it out on 4 or 5%. And then the number at the end is actual wealth, not just inflationary wealth. And then in terms of your tax point, most markets, Western markets, have tax efficient accounts. In the UK, we have ISAs and pensions. In America, you have Roth IRAs. Most places have some form of tax efficient account that allows you to shelter your money from taxation. So use those, because arguably avoiding tax is the main reason we invest, not the growth. Because in the UK, I can dodge 40%, 45% tax by putting money into a pension, say. And the tax is on a gain. So typically you can grow the investment value and you won't be taxed on that investment value until the point you liquidate it. So, you're investing for your retirement down the line, and you might be viewing the taxable position today thinking, God, if I locked in those gains now, I'd be getting rinsed. But you'd be thinking about this from a point where the only income you have is that income, that retirement income, and you're drawing down and taking advantage of any tax-free allowances and bans and things that you've got. So I would try to just think of the tax in the sense of use tax-efficient accounts, but don't think about the tax too much, because it's like manana in that sense.
So then people, let's say they've had a ferocious year and they've got a bonus from their boss. Sitting on that money, let's say they get the money, they've paid off their bills, they might stick it in a savings account, or they might just put it into their bank account and hold on to it. Really, every day that they're not doing anything with it, there's an opportunity cost, and actually a real cost to that, because of the fact we're devaluing money. Now, I've gone on my own little tangents online looking into the gold standard. So am I right in believing that previously money was tied to a fixated amount of gold that was made. But now we're in a world where banks can create money. And is it true that when banks give you a mortgage, it's not actually an allocation of funds? They're kind of just creating money out of thin air. And what's the truth with all this stuff we see online? And banks are printing the money. They're creating it at such a rate that if you leave it in your bank account, it's devaluing. What is the fact from fiction on this?
Well, so I think there's almost two separate points, right? So the inflationary number was invented on the cuff by like an economist in New Zealand who basically just said, oh yeah, 2% inflation should be pretty good. And we've all just latched onto it. And the core idea that they would argue is you want to devalue people's money over time slowly so that they spend it. It kind of encourages people to spend into the economy. People will disagree with that. They won't agree. But this is the logic, right? The gold standard was this idea that we pinned the value of money to gold, and you can see it on the notes. There's the tradition of this belief that it was pinned to something real is on there. Now it's just a trust-based system in the sense that money has value because we all believe it has value. But then when they removed the gold standard, so the UK removed it, early in the century, and then I think it was Nixon got rid of it in America. I mean, think of how big our economy is and how much gold we would need to have every bit of currency linked to the gold. It would be a bit ridiculous if every penny or every pound or dollar in the world was linked to real gold. There's probably not enough gold there. And what you see is they were whittling it down anyway. So they were edging us away from the gold standard. We do create money. We create it through the issuance of bonds, which are like government debt. And this is probably the inflation that people speak of. The best example that we have of this, and the best example I think of inflation is the recent period we had with the quantitative easing that we saw through the COVID period. Everybody stayed at home in the UK in lockdowns, and the way we paid through that was the creation of money. That money is sloshed into the system, and the repercussions were we had massive spikes in inflation because what we essentially did was we created more of the same thing chasing the same amount of goods, which means everything becomes more expensive. It's a really convoluted and hard way to explain it because it's not a simple system. But people are pretty spot on in the sense of governments have created shitloads of money in the last few years, and we see that through the debt balances that exist on countries now.
And one of the quiet ways that people are getting taxed is that through inflation, people's wages should rise. As things become more expensive, we see an increase in wages. Also, am I right in thinking that wages need to rise in line with, they need to rise with inflation, but then the tax brackets that go with those should also rise. Because if you're going to have a fair system of saying, okay, you guys are at 40%, you guys are at 45%, you guys are going to go this after a certain amount of money. If the purchasing power of that money has diminished and the property prices and the loaf of bread and the first class stamp have all gone up, if wages do increase and money gets devalued and those tax rates stay the same, it's almost as if they're getting lowered over time.
Yeah, so what you're hinting at there is something called fiscal drag, and it's the biggest form of robbery that we've seen in the Western world, I would say, of the last 20 to 30 years. So this freezing of the tax bands and then telling the population of your country that you're not increasing taxation on them is just an outright lie. It's taxation by stealth. The Rooker-Wise Amendment was something in the 1970s in the UK government where they basically wrote into legislation that you couldn't do this because they called it dishonest. They basically said you're lying to people if you say to them, we're not taxing you more, but we're freezing your tax bands. If you look, you only need to look at the amount of people that pay higher rate tax bands in the UK now and the types of jobs that pay them. I mean, I don't want to show your age, mate, but I think when we were kids, if you were a high rate taxpayer, that meant something. It meant you were like doing well in life. And if you were earning 100 grand a year, like, holy shit, you were minted. Nowadays,
might as well have a black Amex.
Yeah. Whereas now, quite a large proportion of nurses, I think 10% of nurses are higher rate taxpayers. It's set to really ramp up. Teachers are, what we would call working class jobs, are now higher rate taxpayers and people are struggling. And this is how you kind of get that perverse thing of people going, I earn 100k a year and I'm struggling, because that 100k a year should have risen with inflation, and it should be 160k a year before you hit that tax bracket. I think the higher rate tax band in the UK should be closer to 70, 80k, depending on how you measure it. So by holding them there, they've raised billions extra. The freezes that Rishi Sunak in the UK announced, again, I'm sorry, I know you've got an international audience, but this will apply across the Western world. But in our country, that was an extra 40 billion of tax rises without moving any bands. And we've just had an extension that are going to bring in an extra 15 billion. So you're talking thousands of pounds per adult. I think it's about £1,500 for every working adult off the top of my head. But obviously it's, if you're a higher rate taxpayer, it hits you harder. I worked out for me, it's about £6,000 a year. I'm down through fiscal drag.
So I'm glad that you've got the complex terms for what the things are in my head. So in Australia, we've probably got 60% of this audience is in the UK. So I reckon the majority of our listeners are there, so it's applicable. But in Australia, being here over the last few years, I always thought Australia was a crazy place for tax. Our top rate of tax is about 47%. It's 45 plus you've got a 2% Medicare levy, but the healthcare here is incredible. So absolutely fine. But then on looking into it a little bit closer, I realised the UK is much worse for tax. So for instance, in Australia, when I mention about inheritance tax, they're like, what? You work your whole life, pay taxes on property to then have to pay tax when you sell it. But yeah, but isn't that quite normal? Then I thought, but in Australia, what's really evil is they have a luxury car tax. So after a certain amount of money that you want to spend on a car, you then have to pay per dollar, cents on each dollar as a tax just for buying a nice car. So last year I went
That hurts you, doesn't it? I know you got that nice car, mate.
But then I got an Audi RSQ8 and I'm going through the maths and I then break it down. And I'm like, hold on, this actually works out the exact same price as what it would cost in the UK. And I realized the dealership, the guy said to me, well, they pay VAT the whole way up, 20%, where you pay GST here, which is 10%. So it worked out the exact same because GST is our 10% equivalent. And when I go back to the UK now and I see VAT, 20% slapped on top of goods and purchases, I think to myself, that's abhorrent. 20% on top of something that you're going to pay for. So then we have franking credits here. So when you pull dividends from a business, there's no double taxation. There's all these kind of incentives that are put in place for the high tax bracket. But when I look at the UK tax system and the amount of tax that people are paying, some of the policies seem abhorrent. So much, so crazy.
Yeah, well, I think the issue is, right, that the politicians in the UK will hide behind the general public's naivety to what they're actually taxed, in the sense of if I go out into the street and I ask someone what their tax rate is, they will quote their marginal tax band. They'll say, 20%, 40%, 45. They're not including national insurance in that. They then don't factor in the fact that there's got VAT on every purchase, on council tax and the layers of taxation. I mean, like for me as a limited company director, I have corporation tax, which people would say is not me because it's the business, but I feel that money leave my bank account. And then when I have to pull it out and I have to pay dividend tax and things on this. So the tax rate that I pay is pretty high before I then even start consuming. I want to push on one point that you said there. You spoke about inheritance tax and how people think that it's kind of unjust that you work all your life, you pay all your tax, and then you get taxed again on your inheritance. But show me a tax that isn't a double tax. Like, I don't know why people pull out inheritance tax and go, we shouldn't be taxed twice. You're paying your council tax, your property taxes on taxed income already. So inheritance tax isn't special in that sense. And also, you're dead. Like, why do you care? Like, it's going to your kids. And at the point your kids receive it, is that not income? Is that not income at that point?
I'll tell you what, there's a property near where I grew up, without giving away where my parents live. There are these beautiful fields and they're used for sport. And I grew up there as a kid. And I used to walk my dog there all the time. I remember walking across these fields. First girl I ever asked out in my life was in these beautiful fields. I used to go there for a run every day with my dog, who's now dead. And I used to listen to Linkin Park, Meteora. It was my favourite place in the world. And I've gone back, and since it's been converted to landfill, because one of the owners had a sudden death and hadn't got inheritance tax, hadn't set up a family trust properly. So they were slapped with millions of pounds of inheritance tax. And the only way they could pay it was to turn these beautiful fields into landfill. So for me, I feel it's not even my property. It's just where I used to walk the dog. So for me, they kind of sting that imagine someone knocking on your door. Oh, sorry, your parents are dead. Also, cough up a few million. Obviously, the people were very fortunate in this position. Obviously, there should have been things in place. But for me, it's almost like we do have this this message out there: tax the rich, or there's the wealth tax. So I'm very interested to know what your ideas are. Some of these proposed plans coming forward in the UK. But like you just said, someone out there called Dave, let's say, he's paid corp tax, so that's 25%, and you have to win that money as a business to have it. It's not like it just magically appeared. So Damien has to win over £100, let's say, of which not all of it's profit, of which is profit, corp tax is gone. So you've had the costs of operating a business, then you've got your corp tax, although you could say to deduct that from it because it's profitability. Then you've got your personal income tax, then you've got VAT, then you've got all of those things in your life, like your coffee, your food, your electricity bills, your council tax, all of those things. To then have money left over as a surplus, to then invest it in assets. They go, oh, you want to buy a house? Perfect. Stamp duty. Then you buy the house. Then you've got the upkeep of the house. Then you've got the rates and all of that on the asset that you bought. So I kind of feel like you've been dwindled so much of your money that, you know, if you were to die, for me, it seems unjust to implement another tax. For instance, exactly what you say there. But in Australia, I believe they allow you to pass it down free of charge. You can sell it. And if you sell it, you don't pay any capital gains. However, if you hold the property for more than 2 years, then you sell it, you do. So the government, I believe, give you 2 years to determine whether or not it's going to be something you sell, something you live in. But if you have it for more than 2 years, it becomes an asset. And then if you sell it, you're going to get capital gains. Would you say that's fairer or a more ridiculous way of doing it? I could have butchered that.
No, it's fine. I mean, these systems are complicated and they're hard to just come off the dome, and this is part of the problem with it all. Like, for example, I think only 4% of estates in the UK actually pay inheritance tax, but yeah, every man and his dog moans about it, even though they'll never pay it, because you get allowances in the UK as well, which can total up to £1 million if it's the home and things. So most normal people listening, this is not a tax that they pay, but over time, because of the fiscal drag point we talked about before, because they're not increasing these allowances with indexation, and because they've included pensions now in the mix, more people will pay it. But yeah, it's the most hated tax after beer tax. But everybody pays beer tax, not everybody pays inheritance tax. True. I think it's just like an ideological stand of like, that's my money, I should be able to give it to my kids. I'm not here arguing for inheritance tax. I just want to create like the pushbacks for you so that the audience can think. And the one thing I'd say is, let's say you bought a house in London in the 80s and you're just a teacher, and for just pure luck, you bought a house in Mayfair or central London for 40, 50 grand and it's worth 4 million quid today. At the point you die, when has that gain been taxed?
Okay.
Like, you've made all that money for what? And you've not made that money. You've not increased the price of the house. What's actually increased the price of the house is the productive output and the ingenuity of the population of the country you live in, and the taxes they pay, and the security provided in ownership structures, in the rule of law, in just the miracle that is London. Because you could have come bought one in Zimbabwe and it might not have done the same thing, right? Or, you know, wherever else in the world. So should that gain not be taxed?
That's a brilliant answer. You raise a very good point. I didn't know it's 4%, and you've put me in my place with that. And I'll accept that I could be potentially wrong on this. Now, I want to get into Henry's
yes,
high earners, not rich yet. But before that, I want permission to put my tinfoil hat on.
So, go for it.
There's housing prices are rocketing through the roof. There's not been an abundance of wealth seeking, making, entrepreneurialism in the UK. So the majority of people use their homes as an investment vessel, let's say. Maybe pay down your mortgage over 30 years and you can always sell, downsize, have some capital that way. That's kind of the gold standard for a lot of people. Now, there's always been this issue. So many politicians come in, they say, we're going to build this many houses. Now, my tinfoil hat comes on thinking the banks and the government are kind of in bed with each other. The government say we need to build 3 million houses, and the banks are probably, and by the way, I've got no evidence to back this up, that's why the tinfoil hat. The banks say, oh, don't build more houses. Why is that? Well, because if you build more supply, the cost of a house will go down. And if the cost of the house goes down, we can't lend people so much money to get on the property ladder in the first place. Not only that, they say to the government back, if you devalue properties, you might put someone in a negative equity balance, or you might even, if someone's house isn't going up, they'll be outraged. They'll be out in the street. They'll be parading signs around, want the government out. Is there any collusion is it genuinely just a lack of labor? Or do you think that there is this commodity finite amount of demand and there is people that benefit and make huge amounts of money out of there being not enough houses? Because why is it that the UK don't build enough houses? Why is it happens in Australia? Why is this happening everywhere?
The biggest voting bloc in any population tends to be the homeowners, the OAPs. They turn up on force. If you piss them off, you lose the election. So there's this conflicting desire to appease to the largest voting base, who are homeowners. I don't want to say wealthy, but tend to be the wealthiest within the economy, versus the needs of the first-time buyers, who unfortunately don't vote. They don't turn up to, so they're not represented in that sense. And I also think there's so in the UK, the politicians struggle to be honest with the public and say, we struggle to build homes because all the Polish builders that were amazing left because you voted for Brexit. So I think there's supply side issues. There's the issues around building the homes, the cost. I know guys who buy houses in Wigan, which is a northwestern town, and the price they buy them for is cheaper than what it is to build them. So you've got a real issue there. How are you meant to create supply in an area like that, where if you build the house, you've instantly got to take a haircut, basically, in terms of, it costs 200 grand to build it, 150 grand it's worth on paper. Who's going to build that? And then you've got issues with land, in the sense of lots of these house builders are sat on large banks of land because it suits them to drip feed it into the market, because why would they just dump 1 million homes on the market? And then you've also got ridiculous planning laws across the world. I don't know what they're like in Australia, but the NIMBYs have a lot of power. One person can hold up a massive development. If you go to China, they'll just bulldoze your house. They don't give a crap. They build these motorways in months, it seems. Whereas in the UK, we'll spend hundreds of millions fighting people who are talking about the conservation of a slug species or a bat. True story. So I think the Thames Valley crossing in the UK cost 138 million in planning, whereas the longest tunnel in the world, which is in Norway, I believe, which is not a cheap country, costs less than the planning application to build. So that's a problem. I think there's lots of competing factors.
Yeah, that's so true. This is why I knew it'd be so interesting to talk to you about these things. The housing one seems like a big one. Interestingly, one of the next episodes I'm to release, I had a guy on talking about birth rates and why we're not having enough kids. And I said, housing. And he goes, well, there's loads of houses in Scotland, they're not having kids. I went, money. He goes, well, in third world countries, they're having loads of kids. Everything I had to say to him about why we weren't having kids, he was like, no, it's not true. There's a common belief and there's the reality behind it. So if we go back to the Henrys.
The demographics issue. This is what I was talking about before with the retirement piece. Sorry to interrupt you, mate. But we got an aging population where the population triangle's going like this. So you got all these people at the top there entering retirement. And what that means is they want state pension and they want the NHS services. And the block of people that pay for those services below them is getting thinner and thinner, which means it's called the dependency ratio. So this is how many people a worker supports. In the past, when these systems were designed, you had 10 workers for every one person retired. It's now getting to 3. So 3 workers for every person retired. And the cost of maintaining these people, I'm being a bit blunt here, and I don't want to use words like maintain and sustain when I'm talking about your grandma, right? But keeping your grandma alive is expensive, because she'll sit in a hospice for 10 years or a care home or whatever. So this is the big challenge that Western economies face. You look at France, they spend 12% of their total GDP on their state pension allocation. And anytime they try and tweak it, the 20-year-olds riot, because they're like, I want to retire at 60. They don't realise that that system will collapse if they don't change it.
They're saying, one of the other people I spoke to said that we're going to have to raise the pension age. So similar to the tax brackets you spoke about, as the world changes and the economy changes, we're also going to have to, people are living longer. So maybe when the first pension was introduced, I don't know, 100 years ago, may not be 100 years, people might have been dying at 70. Now they're living to 85. So you've not only got a larger cohort of people, they're now living for longer. And as technology improves and increases the average lifespan, that's got to be considered. I like that Jimmy Carr the other day said, no taxes in your 20s, no taxes after in your 60s, which to me sounded great because it might get people going back to work when they're slightly older, and it might incentivize people to work more. But like you say, that cohort of retired people on state pensions is going to be a bit of an issue. Now, before I ask you what you would think about Jimmy Carr's sentiment of that, I remember hearing, it sounded morbid at the time, but it was a tribe, it might have been in Papua New Guinea or somewhere in the world that was still living in olden ways. And they said in the tribe, the old people would always fall behind a little bit when they were moving around, and the youngsters would eventually come behind them and put an axe in the back of their head. And it was when they couldn't keep up with the tribe. And the old people wouldn't flinch because they once had to put the axe in someone's head when they were younger. And it was just a rite of passage. It was just, okay, if you can't keep up with the tribe, that's it, we're going to take care of you. But it wasn't seen as like a sad thing. It was just seen as the rite of passage of how you go through it. I'm not saying that we kill pensioners. I'm not. But
Sounds like you are, mate.
Back in the
Axe to
day,
the back of the head.
back in the day, they had a system. Now, I'm just saying maybe we relax some euthanasia laws. You know, maybe
we are looking at that, aren't we? And I spoke to someone, an economist, who said he thinks in 20 to 30 years it'll be seen as morally abhorrent to live past like 80, like because you're such a drain. Now, one thing I want to talk about in terms of life expectancy, just while we're on it, people throw out this kind of longevity stat of, oh, we're all living longer. But let's look at two things. Let's look at what is the quality of that life like. So if you raise the state pension age, and the average American has 9.9 year golden years. So they retire and they have about 10 years of like golf courses and, you know, Malibu and all that before they don't want to leave the house and they can't move. So that retirement is quite short. Then they have about 10 to 15 years of just basically being kept alive by drugs and being agoraphobic and not wanting to leave the house. When we say longevity, what we need to look at is like quality of life in retirement. Because if we keep shifting the state pension age or the retirement age up, what you're doing people to do is work their whole life and then just sit in their house on medical care. In the same way, right now in the UK, 14% of people never hit state pension age. They die before it. The average life expectancy doesn't capture the reality that nearly, 1 in 10 people die before it. Every year you crank the state pension age, thousands more people die before they ever get to retirement. And that's the thing that's the issue with averages. They describe a middle and people think, oh, well, the average person lives till 85 now, so let's crank the state pension age. Average is the middle. Plenty of people never get there. So I have kind of like a moral dilemma there of if we crank that state pension age, we commit thousands, millions of people in the long term to never getting there at all. And is that fair? And it tends to be the poorest people in society that don't get there.
Yeah, the socioeconomic status of even the amount of status you have, the quality of job, income, all of these things. That again is a very fair point. I've always had this weird kind of inclination against retirement because I think when you're young and you're in your 20s, you're like, I don't want to retire. For me, sitting around and doing nothing is one way to make myself depressed. Even now, I went to training today because this might not go out for a couple of weeks. And training at 11 a.m. on a Monday is packed. I'm like, what's going on? They go, it's Christmas, James. People are winding down. I go, what's that? It's been 12 years since I've been employed where we used to clock off for Christmas. And don't get me wrong, I love those days of where when I left the office on the 18th of December, I didn't care what happened for 2 weeks. And yeah, so for now in my life, I've always said to myself, like, I like to live each life or each year through my life as if I'm not saving it all for the end. Because between 30 and 36, 30, I used to love going out drinking. 36, I hate it. 30, I could sneeze without bracing my lower back. 36, I got to put 2 hands on my knees. Life deteriorates so quickly. And people that kind of maybe are from our generation thinking, oh, I can't wait 20 years, maybe 30 years going to retire. I'm like, that's a bet in itself. So people say, and this is kind of my anti-investment angle. So I bought a Porsche this year, one of the financially worst decisions ever, because I could have bought an asset and with the repayments on it, I could have kept a loss going, could have had generational wealth potentially. And instead I was like, no, because the average 911 driver is 52. And I struggle to get in and out of it some days at 36. And I think to myself, although it's amazing to bank these assets and to save money and build wealth for the future and set up your retirement, at the same time, like you just said, you might not make it there. And although it's very risky not to invest, there is an element of risk of saving everything for that moment. You know, the sentiment that you should definitely set up some of your finances as if you're going to live for another 40, 50 years. But there should be a part of you, don't you think, that should spend your finances like you're only going to live another 50 days?
100%. And this is where I need a bit of you in my life, mate, because I'm terrible at this. Like I'm not going to sit here and say I've got money figured out. I am too far the other way. I was mental in my 20s, ended up in loads of debt, like to party like yourself. You can tell by the lines in my face that I spent a lot of time in kitchens talking to people about business ideas that never came off. And I now swung the other way, and I'm like obsessed with saving, and those are my own issues. So I'm not saying be like that, but I think the balance is right, and I envy anyone who can strike that balance. And yeah, living for today, because if you are just chucking it all away for a time when you think you're going to need it, actually what my experience with financial advisors is that people get to 70 and they don't want to leave the house anymore, and these people kind of put off retirement to say, oh, I'll get a bit more money because I want to fly business class all the time. And if I work for an extra 2 years, I can fly business class around the world. They put it all off, they retire, and then their mindset shifts. They get scared of themselves and hurting themselves and leaving the house. What I would say to young people, I think we can hit on 2 points you mentioned there, is look at the people in front of you and don't think that you're a different species to them. When I was in my 20s, I thought I knew it all. And, you know, I looked at people in their 30s like why are you not going out? I'm going to party for my rest of my life, blah, blah, blah. I get to 36 now. I literally will not go to social events because the idea of beers scares me, you know. So I look at my mom, who retired when she was 55. She hated work her whole life, wanted to retire. She retired within 12 months, she was back in work. What that tells me is I might one day get to that point and go, I want to keep working, I want to be useful. All the people that I meet that are in their 80s that continue to work are the sharpest people ever. The people who stop, they deteriorate quite quickly unless they find something that keeps them active. So I think this retirement problem, one big solution to that is people keep active, people keep working. I think people like me and you, mate, might be slightly different to some other people in the sense of I'm only happy if I'm working. But yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely got that. I need to be solving problems all the time. But then on the flip side of that, to counter-argue my point, people that squander money, there's a look in their eye. People that had it. I remember I'd watch National Geographic documentaries of people that had done crack cocaine. I remember there was one guy and he was like, I used to be a millionaire and I had the choice between my wife, my kids, my family, my boat, my cars or crack. And he's like, and I chose crack. And he was the only person that I've ever seen squander his wealth who actually smiled about it. But other people, they're like, oh man, if I was just smarter with my money, I could have done this, I could have done that. There's definitely a part in the back of my brain that never wants to be that person, never wants to be mid to late 40s thinking, oh, if I'd only just done this. So I think sometimes it is better to be a little bit too conservative with things and then sit there and go, okay, I'm going to buy something. But the crazy thing is, and my dad won't mind me saying this, my dad in my eyes was always incredibly financially literate. And then I found out he wasn't. And it was only when I took over the mortgage for the house, I said, okay, I'll take over the mortgage. There can't be much left. And then I looked and I go, how can the mortgage outstanding be more than what you paid for it? I said, that's not how this works. And he goes, oh yeah, sorry son, we've been using it a bit like a cash machine for the last few years. And he made a lifestyle decision then, which I'm grateful for, because that lifestyle decision was my childhood. So I think that in my head, I thought my parents were better off than they were. But really, as the house price was appreciating, they were just remortgaging and we were living the good life. Fortunately, I'm in a position now that I can help with that. But I suppose the question is, some people, the lifestyle choices they make are going to be so heavily dependent on when they finish work and retirement and the life they want to have after it. But no one, I suppose it boils back down to education. I don't think anyone ever sat down with my dad. I think I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, And I said to my dad, your house technically is a liability. He goes, no, it's an asset. I went, not if you live in it. I think that's a quote from Rich Dad, Poor Dad, isn't it?
Yeah, especially if you've got it mortgaged at more than its valued, it's definitely not an asset then. I think...
No. It was mortgaged. So he bought it for X. The mortgage outstanding is now about 5 times X. They're still within a good buffer for the house value. But because they bought it 20, 30 years ago, I expected, well, back then it must have only been worth £70,000. So it can't have much left on it. So sorry, Karen. This podcast is and will remain ad-free. I'll still chirp up every now and then to promote a couple of things, but I'm not going to have external sponsors come on here and tell you about their greens powder or biltong. For that to happen, I just ask that those of you that can see the links in the description below, whether on Spotify or on YouTube, just check them out. I'll be either getting you to try new tonic, or if you don't love it, I'll refund your purchase. I'll be trying to get you to use my coaching app where we've had over 125,000 people be paid clients and we take care of all of your training for you. That's at James Smith Academy on Instagram or jamesmithacademy.com. And the last thing is I help small businesses make more money online using social media. Over the last few years, I've had to become a bit of a social media guru, so to speak. So whether you're a personal trainer, an accountant, or someone that just wants to build their personal brand, you can head to jamesmith.business. So one more time, new tonic for the world's best productivity drink, jamesmith.business. For any help with your personal brand, and jamesmithacademy.com for any coaching needs, wants. Anything I promote of my own stuff, if you don't love it, let me know. I'll refund you in full. All right, let's get back to the episode.
No, I think this point around lifestyle, I think, is a really important one because I think we're all surrounded by these triggers that make us feel crap about ourselves constantly. I drive a beat up Mercedes A-Class that I bought when I got dumped by a girl, and she dumped me because I didn't have a car. So I bought the car and I've owned it ever since. And I'm going to ride that thing into the ground, basically. It's like, and I pull up to my gym where I live in the northwest of England, and there's like people in like Lamborghini Uruses and stuff like this. And I feel crap about myself. I honestly feel crap about myself. But then I just realised that all that tells me about that person is they spend a lot of money on a car. It doesn't tell me about their financial situation at all. And if anything, if they're spending a lot of money on a car, it probably means they've got less money in other areas of their life. What we know is about people is that we collect in groups that are similar to us. If you're at work and there's 5 people on your team and one of those people on your team is driving this ridiculous car, he's probably just spending way more of his salary on that car than you would. Most people don't tend to have exposure to billionaires in their day-to-day life. And when you get circles of billionaires, they collect together. So if there's someone in your life that you look at and you think, wow, he's so financially sound because he's got a massive house, a really nice car, and he works where I do, chances are they're earning a similar amount. They're just blowing it all on those things, and they're not building assets behind it.
Yes. So for me, like without turning this into give me advice for free, Damien, one thing I've been doing the last few years very aggressively is paying down my mortgage. But in Australia, we have offset accounts where if you were to give me $1 right now and I put it into my home loan, it deducts my repayment in real time. So we're incentivized to save. So it's not that I'm giving the money back to the bank. It's that I'm hoarding my savings to reduce my repayments in real time. But now I'm at a conundrum where I paid down about $50,000 of my home loan the other day, and it reduced my repayments by about 30 quid a week. And I was thinking, this isn't good anymore. This is a terrible use of capital. This is, if anything, it now gave me anxiety that I'm at the beginning of the mortgage, pay it down a bit, reduce your repayments, because if the interest rates are about 5-6%, I'm in essence saving or getting a weird return on 5-6% by not paying the interest. But now I'm seeing diminishing gains from that. And now I'm getting itchy to determine where I need to go from this point onwards, because I should stop repaying the house because I pretty much paid it off.
Well, let me ask you a question then. So what matters to you? Is it this idea of generating the best return you possibly can, or is it this idea of security that you get from having a paid off house?
I hate debt. And so I never had a credit card till I was about 29. And I only got one because I tried to rent a car and I wanted to show off in front of a girl. They said, have you got a credit card? And I was like, no. But I was like, I've got money though. They said, no, we need a credit card. I was like, oh, I was at an airport. I was like, oh, we'll get a cab then. So I got my first Amex, like 29. But I've just never liked debt because I lived out an overdraft throughout most of my 20s. So there's that component of it. But now I'm getting the idea that it's not really debt, or it's not, we have the terms good debt and bad debt, right?
So can we do that? We'll come back to the inflation point that we were talking about before. If the interest on your mortgage is 5%, but inflation is 3.8%, 4%, the actual cost to you long term is only 1% because you deduct the rate of inflation off the debt. So that's a very cheap loan. And what most people don't realize is in a high inflationary environment, having debt is good because the balance of the debt gets eaten away by the inflation over time. It's the reverse effect of you having money in a bank account. You got someone else's money in your bank account and they're getting hammered by inflation. So actually having debt in periods of high inflation is pretty good. The thing is, right, there's like the numbers answer and then there's the psychological answer here. And I think everyone has this dilemma and debate. I'm a numbers guy, so I'm going to look at it and go, there's a guaranteed 5% return that I can get by paying down my mortgage early, but there's a potential on average 9 to 10% nominal return through the stock market. And if I look over the last 5-6 years, this been closer to 16%. I would rather myself put the money into the stock market, generate a return, and know that I've still got access to that capital to pay down my mortgage if I want at some other point. But there are other people out there who just can't sleep at night knowing there's a debt balance hanging over them. And it's personal finance, it's personal to you. So just clear the debt, get rid of it. In the same way, you want the car, mate, get the car. As long as you're ticking all the other boxes and you're saving for your retirement. I hate it when people call people idiots that overpay their mortgages or vice versa. It's what works for you. So yeah, I would push it back on you and just say, do you want a debt-free house more than you want a potentially better return elsewhere?
Because this is the issue, right? Because the second that debt's paid off, then bigger houses are looking nice. That's the problem I get caught up in. You think, they go, can you afford it? You go, I don't have a mortgage on my house. I can afford it. So, because I did this once, one thing to any business owners listening, and I'm sure you might have done this as well, is when you physically actually write down your goals. I have a desk at home, I have a little whiteboard in front of it, and I write down financial goals as far as revenue. I've got there to pay down the cars, pay off the house. They're just goals that are there. But when they're there, they kind of come to life a little bit. And about 2 years ago, I wrote down, once I pay off the house, I'm going to go buy my dream car. And then I've had a lot of wins in my life and they've all felt the same. Is that it? And I actually know that if I pay down the house, the day I do it, I'm just going to go, cool. So I went and bought the dream car, which was an Audi RS6 at the time. And it's just one of those things where we sometimes can put up these massive walls around us, like that debt safety net, where I'm going to pay down the house completely all the way to get there and go, oh, I feel no security. I feel no happiness. If anything, I just feel an urge that I need to now live in a bigger house because I can afford this one. I've got no debt on it. So I'm now changing in that. But then I have other insecurities that I feel like I'm going to be the guy that arrives at the stock market, puts in loads of cash and it crashes, or invests in ETFs and someone goes wrong time, or, invests in property and then someone comes around the corner and goes, oh, you didn't invest in property at the end of 2025, did you? This guy, fucking idiot. There's all these bubbles, collapses, these rational fears that people have.
Oh yeah, like these are the great fears, the ones around timing. But I mean, it matters, mate, if you need the money next year. But with your kinds of timelines, I would say that you kind of need to step away from that. There are ways to manage it though. So let's say you've got 100 grand now and you're going to invest in the stock market. The biggest fear of individuals is that they put that in the stock market and then it drops 20% the next day. So you could, if you wanted to, just drip that money into the market over a 6 to 12 month period, say, to mitigate against that. Lump sum investing, which is throw all of the money into the market, tends to perform better than drip feeding because the market tends to go up more than it goes down. 66% of days, I believe, roughly, or 66% of the time, the market's going up. So it makes more sense to get your money in the stock market as quickly as possible. But yeah, these corrections in valuation are normal. The problem with the stock market is, Warren Buffett tells this great story. It's like if you owned a farm and there was a guy that every day stood outside your farm and just shouted the price at you, you might feel compelled to sell your farm some days. Because one day he goes, I'll give you £1 million. The next day he goes, I'll give you £500,000. And you're like, holy shit, like it's just lost half of its value in a day. Like I need to sell this thing. But we don't have that with assets like property. We don't have these live prices. Whereas with the stock market, you have this minute by minute pricing. And because we have that data, people feel compelled to act on it, but they should really treat it like it's a house. I mean, what you're actually buying when you buy the global stock market is you're buying into the share of the greatest businesses on the planet, the labor, that labor point before, the output of all humans on the planet. And I think that's a much safer bet than buying a 3-bed semi in Wigan. Do you know what I mean? Like I would feel much more confident in people delivering value over time than that house.
We do get something in Australia called negative gearing. So if I buy a property for, let's say it's $2 million, so £1 million, and the rental yield on it is only $1,000 a week and the repayments are $1,700, I just deduct that from my tax. So that 700 loss just goes against it. So there are financial incentives to almost make your taxable income go further, so to speak. So there's that shrouding my mind with the property side of things. But what you said there about the farm, that is a very good point about it. Now, one thing, I think either I've got common sense here or I'm a fucking idiot. There's no in between. When it comes to crypto, I hate it. I hate it. Now, this could be rational, could not be. And it just happens to be the people that try and, well, first of all, when someone tries to sell me something, straight away, it doesn't scream sensible. When someone's knocking on your door, buy Ethereum, buy this, buy that. And I'm like, okay, so if I buy this, your portfolio goes up as well, right? Yeah. So I had this videographer and he would always just talk about crypto. And for about the year we worked together, he would just go on about it. I'd be like, mate, we're filming. Can you just, cameras, equipment, your job, can we do that? And I said, okay, cool. I'm going to give you $1,000, put it into anything you want. And I had to get like a Phantom wallet. And then we bought some Solana and some Juniper and something. So it means nothing to me. Then some days it would go up 10%. And other days it'd be down 30%. After about a month, I sold the position. I just said to him, this isn't good for my mental health. Like this, the volatility of this market that I don't even know is real money was a net negative. I don't even care about the $1,000. I care about this volatility of the market, and I'm checking because I'm curious. I'm curious because it's crypto. Where do you stand on cryptocurrencies, their involvement? Is it the future? Is it a Ponzi? Where are we at?
So I hold a bit of Bitcoin, so just for transparency's sake, in case there's a bit of bias there, it's a small portion of my portfolio. And the issue I have with the crypto space is, I think first of all, you separate Bitcoin and then there's everything else. And some people will argue about the everything else. I think there's a prevalence of scams and pump and dumps, and it basically looks like the stock market pre-regulation in the early 1900s. It's just everyone's doing the same crap they did back then. And I think that's really messed with the space. I think that, I don't understand why people are so passionate that they think if you're not all in, you're an idiot. And that is a big red flag to me, because if I hold a 1% allocation to Bitcoin in my portfolio and it does really well, like they think, I win. If it goes terminal and goes to zero, I haven't, it doesn't end me. So I see that as a more balanced, sensible position. And actually that's done well. Bitcoin has performed very well since its inception, but you can't compare Bitcoin to, say, the stock market, because the stock market is an income producing asset. People go out and they do things and they make stuff and they sell it and they generate real world value. Arguably, the value of Bitcoin is as an inflation hedge, in the sense of that it's a fixed supply, and it's not that the Bitcoin's becoming more valuable, it's the dollars that we price it in are getting printed away to nothing. So really, that's how I see it in my portfolio. Schmuck insurance, if it goes well, I've got a bit, and as an inflation hedge long term potentially. But yeah, isn't it funny how all these guys who've got absolutely no money are 100% certain that all your money should be in these things? Because your camera guy, right? I'm guessing he's not driving around in a Lambo.
No, and this is the thing. Although he went on about XRP all the time, and then I think 4 years after it flatlined, he made like a few thousand. But I said to him, I was a bit of a dickhead actually. I screenshotted my Stripe account. I said, great mate, your XRP's gone up. I said, I've been running a business for 2 years and I've 15x'd everything you've made and some. And I said, I got to enjoy every day. I said, every day I was building, every day I was putting in, every day I was allocating, and I could influence. And this is the next point I want to get into. Business owners are in a position that they can influence their own income. So a question for you would be, and for myself and other people, potential business owners, say tomorrow you wake up and your accountant goes, hey, mate, there's £20,000 here. What do you want to do with it? And I know you've done this at some point already. You could invest it in assets and things that could go up, but then there's also the flip to invest it in yourself. You could say, right, I'm going to upgrade, because you've got a studio that you film out of, which has been great for your YouTube channel. I've been watching some of your metaphors and visual props and the depth of field. I can see the effort you've gone to. I can see that you've scripted and you're filming on a high resolution camera and all of those things. And do you have a videographer as well, right?
Yeah, I got staff. Yeah, so I believe in investing in people, and I would probably hire someone with that 20 grand, rather than slap it in the stock market.
So like when also, I know there's a demon on my shoulders that say, buy property, do this. But then the other half of me thinks, I could instead allocate all that money. Let's say I've got £100,000. I could go to the headquarters of Newtonic and say, I'm going to buy £100,000 worth of stock. I'm going to create a stall on Oxford Street, and I'm going to hire 3 people, and we're going to give out cans. And I could inflate the share price of my ownership of that business, or I could hire some members of staff. So there's this other dichotomy that people are in where if they're entrepreneurial, they want to do something with that money. The potential losses are great, but the potential returns are greater. And we see this other area of risk where, do I invest into stocks, shares, ETFs, etc., or do I potentially look to invest in my next 5 years, a business, something I want to do? How do people navigate that?
So one of the biggest issues for the self-employed is a lack of saving in pensions. There are more self-employed people today in the UK than there have ever been, but the savings rate is the lowest amongst those individuals. And the problem is that the self-employed are optimists. They are people who believe that they can drive value, because why would they do it any other way? But the statistics tell us that most of them fail and most of them earn very little money. Your average self-employed person earns less than minimum wage when you factor in all the hours. So, you talk about Newtonic there, and you talk about like scaling that business and driving the value. But unless you exit it at some point, or you get like some valuation rounds or some kind of liquidity event, that money's trapped in there. And we know that not many businesses exit in the grand scheme of things. It's a fraction. And the risk that self-employed people have is they arrive at retirement and they've had all these good intentions and all these plans, and they've rolled the dice a million times and it hasn't paid off. And now what? You're destitute, because most businesses are the individual, in the same sense of, I might sit here and call myself an entrepreneur, right? But Damien Talks Money is going to die in an instant if Damien isn't talking. So what have I built really? I built a high-paid job with a bit of with good cash flows. I've also got like the newsletter and things which we're trying to scale, and we're trying to do that. But what I say to the self-employed is, what is the point of your business? Why are you growing your business? Is it not to support a lifestyle and yourself? And should a priority of your business not be to set you up in retirement? If the greatest thing your business could ever do is you're on the golf course in your 50s and 60s and you go, what, I pay for this by being self-employed. So I say there should be a priority to pension savings, especially amongst the self-employed. But I do agree with you that the risks that people should take should be on themselves. I buy the global stock market because I have absolutely no idea what the stock market's going to do long term. I don't know if America's going to do well. I don't know if the UK is going to do well. I don't know what individual companies will. I just buy it all. And I see that as quite a safe thing to do. I'm essentially betting that the world will keep turning. And if it stops turning, well, we're all fucked anyway. Like, get your Huel and your cat food and a stabby stick, because that's the kind of world we're going to be in, right? So like, I'm okay with that. Then what I do is I take outside risks in my sphere of confidence, which means I put money into making finance content because I, for some reason, seem to be pretty good at that thing, right? You're pretty good at making adverts for Newtonic, mate. My favorite piece of content all year was your little whisper tiny dick thing. There was world-class advert you made. But yeah, like, people talk about risk all the time and taking risks. it's probably better for an individual to risk trying to get a pay rise than risking buying Tesla or Bitcoin, because they know nothing about those markets really. But what they do know a lot about is what they do 8 hours a day, every day. So my investment strategy is really boring, really safe. Buy the whole global stock market inside of a tax efficient account, and then get busy taking risks on the thing that I appear to have an advantage over, which is making YouTube finance content. I hope that answers your question, mate. Sorry.
Yeah, no. And it's great because there's so much nuance to this. And you say, don't know how the UK is going to do, which brings me back to the Henrys. So I'm fascinated by this cohort of people, the high earners not rich yet, because like we said before, the £100,000 a year was once the gold standard of earning. You know, the whispers in the school playground, oh, yeah, this guy's daddy earns £100,000. Wow, you know, that's crazy. And there's some, so we've got childcare allowance. There's pretty much a tax rate. After 100K, you're worse off until you reach 140. Is that right?
I mean, you're worse off anyway, but there's a cliff edge. So that cliff edge is 60% because you lose your tax-free band. But if you've got kids, I think it's 2 kids, you lose the credits and the childcare allowance, which means your marginal tax rate shoots up to thousands of percent. So actually, someone with a couple of kids with 100 grand income is better staying at that point than getting a pay rise, which is mental because that's money that doesn't get spent in the economy. Yeah, so
for me, to have people that someone would have sat there in front of them, you know, designed all of that and gone, yeah, perfect. Someone would have gone, oh, Sandy, have you not seen that people might not want a pay rise for like 2 years? No, it's perfect. You know, how can these policymakers and people that make these decisions have such poor? But what's the thought behind this? Is that to incentivize people to go to 140? Is it to, you know, I just can't understand that.
Yeah, no one can. So the problem is that when these changes get brought in, they affect a very small amount of people. And then over time, more and more people get dragged into them because of the fiscal drag or some other point. And then the tax revenue becomes so significant that the politicians just can't get rid of it. So in the UK, I think we have one of the most complicated tax systems on the planet. Our tax code is more than the complete works of Shakespeare combined. It's like 10 million words. There's more written about tax than any other form of policy or law in the UK. So it's just this mess of add-ons and layers. One example that I could give to you recently in the UK is this mansion tax. So if you've got a house more than 2 million quid, you're going to pay this mansion tax. And most people will be like, oh yeah, well, 2 million quid house, pretty big house. Like, I'm not bothered by that. It's going to raise 400 million a year. But you can bet that they will never increase that band. And in 20 years, your average house will probably be worth near that because of inflation and what it does to the price of things over time. And then you'll be living in a 2 up, 2 down, getting a mansion tax going, how the hell is this a mansion? You know? And this is what happens. They put on a little slither. It doesn't really mean much. And then over time, it becomes such a big revenue take that they can't afford to cut it.
And then people will be sat there going, you voted for this, just like Brexit. It's why we got no houses. You sent the Polish home.
Yeah, it's the immigrants' fault or the transsexuals, or it's let's tax the rich, and we get the populism come in with the simple answers, when in reality what we need is complete reform of the tax code. We need to simplify it, you know, these things.
Which is crazy. It's an interesting world with this. There's so much going on. It's such a hot debate. And like you say, people at the moment can't ever imagine their houses being worth £2 million. So the mansion tax is crazy. The fact they call it a mansion as well, where some people I think Rory Sutherland said this on a podcast recently. He goes, oh, you know, if you live in Fulham in a 2-bed apartment, you'd be considered successful because that's worth £1 million. He goes, 100 years ago, a postman would have lived in that house and he would have had upstairs and downstairs. And he says, you know, like how times have changed, that what would have been a postman's house 100 years ago is now pretty much the epitome of wealth in central London. And yeah, so we've got the mansion tax. There's also a proposed wealth tax.
Yes. Yeah. I think the problem with the wealth tax is the administration of it. Why introduce a new tax when we have wealth taxes that exist? So if you want to tax wealth, like if that's your point, reform council tax properly. Like, so on the mansion tax, right? So what they've done is they've created a taxation point between 2 million and 5 million where it tapers from 5 grand to 7.5 grand. So what that means is if you've got a £20 million gaff, you pay less percentage-wise than the person with 2 million. And I know people are really going to disagree with this, but there is a world where semi-normal people that you would think, live on the same planet you do, have just bought a house in the right area, prioritize that over going on holiday or buying a Porsche, and they've now ended up in a position where their house is worth 2 million quid because they bought like a 500 grand house in London, a few decades ago or a decade ago. Someone who's got a 100 million pound house in Mayfair, you don't just stumble into that by not drinking lattes, right? And the person who's got a 100 million pound house in Mayfair has 10 of other of them all over the world. They got one in Sydney, one in New York, one in Hong Kong. And what they're doing is parking cash in economies because they're probably a shady fucker. And they're worried that so there's going to be a military coup or something wherever and they need money elsewhere. We should be rinsing those people because they're in that house 5 days a year and, they spend millions a year just on their lifestyle. And if you said to them, you need to pay 200 grand a year council tax, which is basically the fee for you to store that money in our economy, they would pay it. I don't know why we're hammering this 2 to 5 million band and making it regressive in the sense of if you own a 100 million pound house, it's percentage points cheaper than owning a 2 million pound house. But yeah, coming back to the wealth tax, I think this broad tax anything above 10 million, 2% is just an administrative nightmare. How do you value people's wealth? Are we going to go around to people's houses and have a look and go, well, you've got a piece of art there and how much is this ashtray worth? And, what we should do is reform council tax because that's a wealth tax that works in the sense of you can't pick up your house and move it to Dubai. And if it's worth 100 million, we all know it's there. So it doesn't matter if a shell company owns it. You pay the council tax on the house, otherwise we take it off you. So I would do that.
Yeah, I think that sounds a lot more realistic. I know people that are happy to pay extortionate amounts of taxes, but they openly say, if the wealth tax comes in, I'm gone. I'm going to Dubai. And actually, I don't even think it's like a financial decision for them. I think it's a principle, if that is the case. It's almost as if they look at these policies and just go, this is stupid. I don't want to be involved in this stupid policy. For that reason, I'm going to leave. What's your kind of thoughts around people that get to this position, maybe have built companies in the UK, accrued lots of wealth, spent money, put money into the economy, but then they get to a point where the tax system gets to, they go, I'm done, I'm out, I'm moving to Dubai. What are your thoughts about that stuff?
Okay, let's have some kind of balance on these points. And all I'm trying to do here is play devil's advocate and argue both sides sometimes. I don't want people to think I'm Gary Stevenson's fanboy or whatever.
Zach Polanski's.
Yeah. Doesn't even know how much the debt is, but wants to rip up the debt system. So it's anyway, I live in the UK. I am a UK national. I run a successful business where if I moved it to Dubai, it would be life-changing for me. I'm talking I'm not rich. I'm a Henry. And that move would change my life. And I could set this studio up in a way that no one would ever know. But I feel this sense of obligation to live in the UK because, I don't know, I talk about it and it kind of annoys me when I see people in Dubai going, oh, the UK's crap. It's like, well, you're not even here. I am a product of the place I was born in. And that means that being in the fortunate position I am, I have benefited from the UK and its tax base and its education system. If I then become successful and go, I'm out, that's kind of well, no, you kind of got to repay the position you were in. And, to the guy who's founded Monzo or whatever, who's now moved to Dubai or whatever, I would say, if I took you and plonked you in sub-Saharan Africa, would you have grown that business? Or is your business a product of the country that you lived in? So is it not a bit cheeky in a sense to go, I've won from the system and now I'm cashing out? That's one argument. I think the other point is that it's not necessarily the amount of tax, it's the value for money point. And I think the UK feels like bad value for money now. I don't mind paying tax if the system works, but you live in a lovely part of the world, mate, and you can probably speak on it better than me. I go to places in the world where when I was a kid, they felt like they were worse than the UK. Now they feel better. They work better.
You go to Barcelona and your phone is safer than it is on Oxford Bridge.
Yeah. I used to go to places in Europe and be like, oh, it's a bit, Spain. You'd be like, we love going to Spain because there's a nice beach, but it feels a bit crap. Nothing really works that well. The pavement's knackered and the grass looks crap. Now I go and I'm like, Jesus Christ, what's going on? How can I get a train in Italy that's like 50p to go across the country, but it's 300 quid in the UK? So the value for money point seems off. And I can understand why if someone has got 100 million quid and they've got mobility over where they want to live in the world, how they would go, well, the product of the UK is just not that appealing to me. And that's the choice that they can make. And they have every right to make that choice. You know, and I think that's what the UK needs to work on, the value for money point.
Yeah, like we had the atrocities this week in Bondi, which are obviously crazy, but ultimately Australia's incredibly safe and our public transport is great. The trains on the way into work, like when I used to work in Fitness First, they were too cold from the air conditioning. It would be 32 degrees. You get on the train, you go, of course, it's freezing on here. I've never seen anyone stand on a train forcefully. And I think the most expensive a train ticket can get on a day is £6. And then on a weekend, it's half price. So there are other things that are cooked though, whereas when you have to fly for 6 hours to leave Australia. So there's that component where you're like just going on a little trip to Bali, nearest country. Just 6.5 hours or whatever. So there are some parts to it, but where you pay your taxes, I think it was Scott Galloway that said it'd be great if when you paid your taxes, even if it wasn't true, thank you, you've paid for a primary school. Thank you. Your money, this installment has just repaved a child's playground. Thank you. We've just bought 7,000 assault rifles for the British Army. You know, some things where at least you get something from it. Like you don't even get a thank you email autoresponder when you pay a tax bill. There are some low-hanging fruit that they could definitely do there. But you're completely right, because everything I is a product of my parents who were brought up in the UK, worked in the UK. My childhood was brought up by my parents' education system, tax system, a legal system, law system. And I was just fortunate enough to leave the UK before it was trendy. But for me, Australia feels like a very adjacent community, kind of country, you know, similar values or whatever. But the Dubai thing it's an interesting one because some people, I think they kind of just say, like you said, you're letting down your side of the deal, so I'm off. And I think actually a lot of people that move to Dubai are just waiting for the UK to improve. I joke around with my partner and say, you know, if I want my son to play good rugby union, he's going to have to come back to the UK. But we've got 12, 15 years before that could be the case. You can go play for Northampton Saints. But up until that point, everyone's thinking, we'll just leave, you guys figure it all out. But by leaving, they're going to make it more difficult. And we spoke about how potentially there could be a little bit of a lag in our conversation between the UK and Australia. But the pain that we're feeling, or you're feeling mostly in the UK at the moment, is a product of probably everything that's happened the 2 years before. And all the millionaires and billionaires leaving now means less money, less taxes to finance things like policing and all of those things. And that pain, I don't think is going to be felt for another 2 years. And I'm just worried as to where that finished position is. Is there a rock bottom? Is there a bounce back? Is there a revolution? What does it look like? And how financially, because I suppose the point I want to get onto is the UK's got a lot of debt and I'm not sure there's quite the game plan to get out of it.
No, so I did a video where I looked at what the UK spends its money on, because if you survey people, most people in the UK think that we spend more money on asylum and immigration than we do on the state pension. So people have a really misconstrued perception of where their tax money is spent, which I think is, you talk about value for money and sending to people like, congratulations, you just bought us a hospital, like these kind of nice messages. Another one would be real clear communication on where the money goes, because the truth of it is 60% of what we spend as a nation goes on welfare. So this is state pension and benefits. It goes on healthcare, and then it goes on debt interest. So the reality is, and then the fourth one is schools. So for a 30, 40-year-old healthy couple with a kid in a school who, like, the answer is your tax money goes on your nan and on your kid, and because your nan is on state pension and she's using the NHS, and it goes on your kid's education. And the reason things feel so crap to you is because the only interaction you have with the tax spend is the transport system, and that's had cuts for 5 years. So you're just going through life going, I pay more tax than ever, yet my commute is miserable. And but this is because all the money goes on the healthcare, the kids, and the debt interest. Now the debt interest is really quite interesting, sorry for the pun, because we spend about 10% of everything on debt interest. It's about 112 billion a year, 112 to 125. It was 40 billion a year a few years ago, and we still continue to borrow at an alarming rate, like hundreds of billions a year. So this is kind of, it's comparable to a house in the sense of what we spent in the past affects how much we spend today. Like 20-year-old James knows when he run that credit card up in one night, he had a great night, but then he's paying for that for the next 5 years. We ran that balance up through 2008. We ran it up through the COVID period when everyone was sat at home drinking bottles of wine, playing quizzes with their families, thinking this is great. We're paying for that now. This is where we land. So yeah, the debt interest this is why they chase growth so much, but it's very elusive. But yeah, that debt problem is big. And when people, one thing I hate hearing is people go, the UK government is 45% of GDP, which is the largest it's ever been. Why do people think a bigger government is good? I don't think a bigger government is good, but what they're missing there is that a large chunk of that spending is on debt interest. It's not that the government are just throwing that money out of the door on other things, right? You know, Dan Priestley's a big proponent of cutting waste. I look at the 60% that we spend on healthcare, on state pension, on education and debt interest and go, okay, mate, why are you cutting in that? Because you're either killing people, you're making the schools worse, or you're like not paying back the debt, which means we default on the debt. So where's the cuts?
Easy, just kill people. Yeah, just get the axe.
Back to this, innit? Just axe to the back of the head. I'd rather like someone do me with something nicer, mate, a bit of morphine or something, not an axe to the head.
We can have it arranged. That could be my next business that I move into. But no, like you say, and for people even such as myself, it is very easy to get caught up in that. I remember I was in the UK a few months ago, and I thought to myself, getting an Uber into London from Windsor just seems like a waste. You know, it's expensive. I'm not a wanker. I'm going to get the train. So I go to Slough train station, usually impeccable trains from there. And I get on the train and I sit on, I've got, you know, like it's not too busy. Actually, no, I think I decided to stand and I was like, oh, I'll be in London in 20 minutes, new Elizabeth line. Then the next station, so many people get on. And it was so crammed on this train that I couldn't even get my phone out to complain. I couldn't even message someone. My hands were stuck by my side. And this guy turns to me and he goes, my wife's read your book. And I said,
oh no.
Is it always like this? And he's like, oh, not usually on a Tuesday. And I was sweating to the point that I had to get off the train early because I was so sweaty. Then I had to get another Uber and I got stuck in traffic. It would have been cheaper for me to just Uber originally in the beginning. And then I'd tapped on and off. And when I looked afterwards, I couldn't believe how much a train ticket was. And I'm the type of person that would have sent me over the edge to move overseas. Forget all the beautiful times, forget how amazing the UK is, forget Clarkson's Farm, forget the Cotswolds, forget what it was like watching Top Gear after Last of the Summer Wine when you're a kid, or listening to the theme of Heartbeat and knowing you have to run to bed. Your mum and dad are going to try to keep you awake and you've got to now try and pretend you're not feeling too well so you could sit on the sofa. All of that goes out the window in an instance when you got too crowded on a train. You're like, that's it, I'm moving to Dubai, pack the bags, tell the family we're off. I think we're just very emotional creatures.
Well, that's your life, mate. That is your life. Like people talk about the grand things, but what your day is your commute and your work. And if the commute, which is a miserable experience, is made more miserable by crap public services, you're going to get really angry at the country because, like I said, that is your experience of I spend money on tax and the thing that I interact with is crap. But then if you go and visit your nan and she's dying in hospital and there's a wonderful nurse like taking care of her, you then go, actually, this is where some of the money's going. But most people don't have that day to day. I think like why the government didn't come in and just try and deliver some quick wins in those areas. Put internet on the train. You can go on the Jubilee line in London and get a great 5G internet connection, like 100 metres below ground. But if you're on the Avanti North West Coast line, going from Manchester to London, it's a Faraday cage, mate. You can't get an internet connection. Like, how is that possible? I can drive 80 miles an hour down the motorway with my phone out and the phone is fine. So, if people got on the train, all those people that day and they're squashed and they're like, oh, but I got an internet connection, they would feel good because they'd be like, it's improving. And you would improve productivity because all those people can start checking emails and stuff. So, these little wins in those areas I would improve. Also, why don't we have why do we have these trains where half of it's first class? I'm going to sound like a right snob here. I have to pay first class on UK trains just to guarantee that I get a seat, which means I pay an extra £100 each way just so I can sit down on a ticket that's already 100 quid. But half the train is first class. So why don't we just make less of the train first class so people can sit down? You know, it's cheaper to fly to Dubai.
Yeah, and some people, I think, wanted to go. Someone I know wanted to go from Bristol to Liverpool, and if they went via Spain and spent a night in a hotel, it was cheaper. But I think it's basic economics, right? They know the train's going to be full, so why? It's a bit like British Airways with their business class, where they just keep moving it back depending on how many people don't want to queue to get on the plane. There is no real business class in British Airways. It's just you don't have your leg touching someone else's.
Yeah,
but yeah. This chat's been great. I know already that you're going to be someone that I'm messaging every few months. Like, let's get back on. I want to talk about more. Just before we wrap up, I want you to tell people where they can find you, anything you're working on, anything you want to promote and plug. Go for it.
Okay, so I make finance content online, and my core belief is that people can improve their situation with simple habits and steps. I don't sell any courses. I don't charge you for the information. You can have it for free. Damien Talks Money is the main channel. I make a podcast called the Making Money Podcast if that's your format. I also have a completely free index investing for beginners course, 2 hours of content that takes you from how, like, not knowing anything to making your first investment. And maybe I could link that for you, mate, because that, I think, is the most impactful thing that someone could do with 2 hours. And that outlines my whole worldview on investing and how to do it.
Not only will put the link in the description, I think I'm going to do it myself, because I'm at a position now where, for me, 0 to 1, it's actually just putting the first £10 in that account that would be the hardest yard. Once it's in there, you go, oh, that was actually quite fun.
Mate, how crazy is it that you will set up a drinks company with Chris Williamson, but you won't put 10 quid in the stock market? Do you know what I mean? You go, oh, what I'll do is I'll try and take on the most competitive industry in the world, because that seems like doable, but I won't invest 10 quid in a global fund, because what happens if it loses money? Like that's mental, mate.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not all sound there in the head, but mate, I've enjoyed being challenged. I've enjoyed the nuance. I've enjoyed the conversation. I know everyone else listening will as well. And yeah, we'll have to catch up and do one of these in person when I next see you in the UK.
I would love to do it in person, so that I've got a 4K camera feed, and I'm sorry to people that it's 1080p, but my capture card broke. So yeah.
Thank you very much.
No worries.